The light in the courtroom is harsh, strip lights buzzing high above, casting long, unforgiving shadows. My heart is a frantic bird trapped in my chest, beating against the cage of my ribs. I can feel the sweat prickling on my upper lip, cold and clammy. He sits across the aisle, flanked by his lawyers, a smug, confident set to his jaw. He thinks he has me. He thinks I'm broken. My lawyer stands, calm, collected. She asks a question, something about company financials, about expenses. It's routine, part of his testimony. His answers are smooth, practiced lies, gliding over the surface of the truth he's buried for years. He catches my eye, a flicker of contempt, a silent dare. He has no idea. Not yet. My lawyer turns to me, a subtle nod. It's time. I pick up the thin file folder from the table in front of me. It doesn't look like much. Just paper. But inside, there's a universe of deception. A carefully constructed world built on lies, ready to implode. I hand it to my lawyer. She approaches the witness stand. The air thickens. Everyone in the room seems to hold their breath. The judge leans forward slightly. She places the folder in front of him. His eyes flick down. He sees the first page, then the next. His smooth expression crumbles. The color drains from his face, replaced by a ghastly, ashen gray. His eyes widen, fixed on the documents as if they are a venomous snake uncoiling. He starts to tremble, a faint tremor at first, then growing, his hands shaking violently on the stand. He tries to speak, a gurgle escaping his lips. His lawyer is on her feet, objecting, but the sound is distant, muffled. His gaze is locked on the papers, on the undeniable proof of his crimes laid bare. And then his eyes roll back, and he collapses. Let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. And if you haven't already, please subscribe. It helps me more than you know. Our life wasn't a fairy tale, not by a long shot, but it felt solid, real, grounded. We built it piece by piece, like a brick house. First came the foundation. The shared dreams, the late-night talks about the future, the thrill of starting something together. Then came the walls, the compromises, the routines, the comfortable silence. The roof was the business. His business, everyone said. But I was inside those walls from the start. He was the face, the visionary, the one who strode into meetings with confidence and closed deals with a handshake. I was the backbone. The quiet engine purring behind the scenes. I managed the finances, handled the payroll, dealt with the vendors, smoothed over the ruffled feathers of employees. I was the one who made sure the lights stayed on, the bills were paid, the numbers added up. We worked side by side, long hours, fueled by cheap coffee and the shared belief that we were building something important, something that would give us security, a future. We didn't have lavish lifestyles. Our house was comfortable, not grand. Our cars were reliable, not flashy. Every penny went back into the business, reinvested, nurturing its growth. It felt like raising a child together. We debated its direction, worried over its health, celebrated its milestones. It was ours. That's what I believed. With every late night spent hunched over spreadsheets, every tense phone call with a difficult client I handled so he didn't have to, every canceled weekend to meet a deadline, I poured my life into it. It wasn't just a job, it was our joint purpose, our shared identity. My name wasn't on the door, but my fingerprints were on every surface, in every system, in the very DNA of the company. He was my husband, my partner, my best friend, or so I thought. There was a fundamental trust that ran deeper than marriage vows. It was the trust of two people tethered together by a shared goal, relying on each other implicitly. I trusted him with my future, and I believed he trusted me with the engine of our life. Looking back, there were cracks I chose not to see, tiny fissures that spiderwebbed beneath the surface of our everyday lives. His increasing secrecy about certain deals, the way his eyes would sometimes dart away when I asked about specific accounts, a growing distance that I attributed to stress, to the pressure of running a business. I made excuses. I told myself he was protecting me from the worry, that he was just focused. love, or maybe just comfortable complacency, built blinders. Then came the conversation. It wasn't a fight, not a shouting match. It was worse. It was quiet, cold, surgical. He sat me down at the kitchen table, the same table where we'd planned our business, where we'd paid bills side by side, where we'd shared countless meals. The setting itself felt like a violation. He didn't look at me. He stared at his hands clasped on the wood grain. He talked about restructuring, about streamlining, corporate jargon that felt alien and wrong in our home. He said the company needed to make changes, tough decisions. My stomach knotted before the words even formed. I knew, instinctively, what was coming. "We need to let you go," he said.
Just like that.
Let me go. As if I was some stranger, some employee he barely knew, disposable. Not his wife. Not his partner of 15 years. Not the woman who had built the financial engine of his company from the ground up, working for a fraction of what I was worth because it was our future. I stared at him, trying to process the words. They didn't make sense. Let me go?
From what?
From my job. He finally looked up, his expression unreadable. From the payroll. The company is. It's just me now. Officially. It's more efficient this way. Tax purposes. Tax purposes. The coldest words I'd ever heard him utter. As if our life, our partnership, our years of shared sacrifice could be dissolved for tax purposes. My mind reeled. Payroll. That was my salary. My income. The money I earned for the work I did. The money I contributed to our household, to our savings, to our life. He wasn't just taking away my job, he was taking away my financial independence. He was cutting the cord that tethered me to the life we had built together. Panic started to rise, a hot wave cresting in my chest. But how will that work? What about our finances? My part. He waved a hand dismissively. We're married. It's all shared anyway. I'll handle everything. You don't need a separate salary. You can focus on other things. The house. Whatever you want. Whatever I want. The phrase hung in the air, heavy with unspoken meaning. It wasn't about giving me freedom, it was about rendering me invisible. Financially dependent. Stripped of my role, my value, my contribution in the only way he seemed to measure it anymore, through the lens of the business. The shock slowly gave way to a deep, bone-chilling fear. And then anger. White-hot and searing. Whatever I want. I don't want to focus on the house. I built the finance department. I managed everything. You can't just erase that. He leaned back, his voice losing its neutral tone, a hint of impatience creeping in. It's done. The paperwork is filed. You're no longer an employee. It's for the best. For his best, I realized. Not ours. Not mine. It was a unilateral decision, made without consultation, without warning. It was a declaration of independence, but only his independence from me. The bricks of our house weren't just loose. The foundation was crumbling. The days that followed were a blur of confusion, fear, and a desperate, clawing anxiety. It wasn't just the loss of income, though that was terrifying enough. It was the complete shift in the dynamic, the sudden power imbalance that felt like a physical weight pressing down on me. He acted as if nothing had changed, expecting dinner on the table, his laundry done, the house running smoothly, while simultaneously treating me like a guest who had overstayed her welcome in his financial life. I tried to talk to him, to understand why. Was the business in trouble? Were we losing money? He was vague, evasive. It's complicated, he'd say, or don't worry about it. I'm handling it, but his handling involved a complete lack of transparency. He controlled the bank accounts, the credit cards. Suddenly, I had to ask for money for groceries, for gas, for everything. Each request felt like a humiliation, a stark reminder of my new, precarious position. He wasn't withholding funds, not exactly, but the power dynamic was excruciating. I was no longer a contributor, I was asking. I started looking at the numbers myself, the household budget, our personal savings. He'd always handled the investments, the larger financial picture. I'd managed the day-to-day. Now, the day-to-day was a tightrope walk. Bills that used to be comfortably covered suddenly loomed large. Our savings, while not depleted, weren't growing. In fact, they seemed stagnant. He'd always been so meticulous with finances in the business, but at home, he was suddenly careless, distracted. The house, once our shared sanctuary, felt cold. We lived together, but we were miles apart. The silence between us wasn't comfortable anymore. It was a heavy cloak, suffocating. Every interaction was strained, every conversation circling the unspoken chasm that had opened between us. He was building a new world for himself, one I wasn't invited into, one he was actively pushing me out of. I felt lost, adrift. My identity had been so tied to the business, to my role in it, to being his partner in every sense of the word. Without that, who was I? Just a wife. A dependent? The thought was galling, offensive. Years of hard work, erased with a few strokes of a pen on a corporate document. The turning point wasn't a sudden revelation. It was a slow, creeping dread that solidified into a chilling certainty. I was cleaning out a closet, looking for some old tax documents we needed, when I found a box shoved in the back. It wasn't labeled. Curiosity, and maybe a growing suspicion fueled by his secrecy, made me open it. Inside weren't tax documents. There were bank statements, but not the ones I was used to seeing. These were from a different bank, accounts I didn't recognize. Shell corporations. Offshore accounts. Documents detailing transfers. Large sums of money moving in complex patterns that screamed laundering or diversion. My hands started to shake as I sifted through the papers. Invoices that didn't match services rendered. Payments made to companies I'd never heard of for work that was never done. It wasn't just money being moved, it was being hidden. From taxes, maybe. From investors? From
Me.
the numbers were staggering.
Milio.
Flowing out of the company, disappearing into a labyrinth of fake entities and foreign accounts. This wasn't just him cutting me off the payroll to save a few bucks or for some legitimate tax strategy. This was deliberate, calculated theft. He wasn't just taking my income. He was siphoning off the company's wealth, the wealth we had built together, and hiding it. The pieces clicked into place with a sickening thud. The secrecy. The vague answers. The sudden push to remove me from the financials. He hadn't just decided I was redundant. He had decided I was a liability. Someone who knew too much, someone who might ask questions, someone who stood in the way of his scheme. He was systematically dismantling my connection to the business to cover his tracks. He didn't just want me out of the business. He wanted me out of the picture entirely, left with nothing while he squirreled away our shared fortune. The fear I'd felt before was nothing compared to this. This was terror mixed with a cold, righteous fury. He hadn't just betrayed me as a wife. He had committed a fundamental betrayal as a partner, as a human being. He had built our life on a foundation of lies, and he was ready to leave me standing in the rubble while he escaped with the spoils. Finding that box changed everything. It wasn't just a marital dispute anymore. It was a crime. And I had the evidence. The decision felt heavy, like holding a live wire. Using this information wouldn't just end the marriage, it would detonate his life. It would expose him, likely lead to criminal charges, ruin his reputation, destroy the business he claimed was solely his. But what choice did I have?
He was coming for me.
He was trying to leave me destitute, vulnerable. This wasn't just about getting a fair divorce settlement, it was about survival. It was about preventing a predator from getting away with his crimes and leaving his victim ruined. I knew I couldn't confront him directly with what I found. He was too volatile, too cunning. I needed help. Legal help. Serious legal help. I carefully photographed every document in that box, then put them back exactly as I found them, my heart pounding like a drum the entire time. I felt like a spy in my own home. Finding the right lawyer was another challenge. I needed someone sharp, someone who understood complex financial fraud, someone who wasn't intimidated by powerful businessmen. I found her through a recommendation, a woman with a reputation for being fierce and meticulous. Her office was small, understated, but her gaze was sharp, her questions incisive. I laid out the situation. trembling slightly as I described finding the box, the documents, the years of my life poured into a business he was now looting. She listened patiently, her expression hardening as I spoke. When I finished, she was silent for a long moment. "This is serious," she said finally, her voice low. "This isn't just divorce. This is potentially criminal." We began to build a case.
Quietly.
Methodically. My lawyer enlisted the help of a forensic accountant. Together, we went through everything I could access. Old bank statements, tax returns, the official ones he'd let me see, records I still had copies of from my time running the financials. It was painstaking work, like assembling a shattered mirror, piecing together the reflection of a truth he had desperately tried to hide. Every discrepancy, every missing piece, every unusual transaction led us deeper into the rabbit hole of his deceit. The shell companies weren't just for show, they were conduits for laundered money. The offshore accounts held vast sums. He wasn't just skimming, he was emptying the company's coffers, systematically transferring assets out of reach, preparing for the inevitable divorce he clearly saw coming, or perhaps just planning to disappear with the money someday. The legal process of divorce began. He filed first, which was a calculated move, trying to seize control of the narrative. His petition painted a picture of a failing marriage, citing irreconcilable differences. He conveniently left out any mention of the business I had helped build, framing it entirely as his sole creation, something I had no claim to beyond basic spousal support. His legal team was aggressive. They portrayed me as uninvolved in the business, a stay-at-home wife, which, post-payroll, I technically was, though not by choice, someone who had contributed nothing substantial. It was infuriating. Everything I had done, all my hard work, my loyalty, my sacrifice, was being erased, rewritten into a narrative where I was a dependent, a drain. The pressure mounted. Legal fees were astronomical. My savings, already strained, dwindled rapidly. He, meanwhile, seemed unconcerned, maintaining his lifestyle, confident in his plan to cut me loose with minimal financial obligation. He knew my immediate financial vulnerability. He was banking on it, assuming I would be forced to settle for whatever pittance he offered just to survive. There were days I wanted to give up. The stress was immense. I barely slept. Every phone call, every legal document that arrived, felt like a blow. I felt isolated, fighting this battle largely in secret. Even telling friends or family was difficult. How do you explain that the man everyone thought was a successful, upstanding businessman is actually a criminal? How do you articulate the depth of betrayal when it's not just emotional, but rooted in cold, calculated financial fraud? But then I would look at the evidence we were gathering, the meticulous records of his deceit, the sheer scale of his dishonesty, and the anger would return, sharp and clear, cutting through the fear. He couldn't get away with this. He couldn't destroy my life and walk away clean, rich from his crimes. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about accountability. It was about preventing him from doing this to someone else, from living a life of luxury built on lies. My lawyer presented him with our initial financial discovery requests. We asked for everything. Every bank statement, every tax return, every corporate record, dating back years. His legal team stalled, obfuscated, provided incomplete documents. They clearly didn't want us digging too deep. They knew there were skeletons, but they didn't know we had already found the grave site. We pushed harder, filed motions to compel, insisted on full transparency. His lawyers were rattled, their confidence beginning to waver. They couldn't understand why I was fighting so hard, spending money I supposedly didn't have, refusing to settle. They assumed I was bluffing or just emotionally driven. They didn't grasp that I had a weapon they didn't know about. My lawyer suggested mediation, a standard step in divorce proceedings. I agreed, though I knew it was futile. He wasn't interested in compromise. He was interested in capitulation. Sitting across the table from him in the mediator's office was surreal. He acted conciliatory, reasonable, offering a settlement package that was laughably inadequate, painting it as generous given my lack of contribution to the business. He even offered to pay for a small apartment for me for a year.
A year.
After 15 years of marriage and building a life together, his offer was a year of rent for a small apartment. His arrogance was breathtaking. He truly believed he had won, that I was cornered and helpless. He smiled, a thin, cold smile, as he explained his offer, detailing why it was more than fair. His lawyers nodded along, confident. They thought they were dealing with a weak, emotional woman who could be easily dismissed. They had no idea I was sitting on a bomb, waiting for the right moment to detonate it. I listened to him, keeping my face neutral. Inside, a cold calm settled over me. The fear was gone, replaced by a hard, unwavering resolve. He had underestimated me completely. He thought he had taken everything, leaving me defenseless. But in his greed and arrogance, he had left behind the one thing that could destroy him, the truth, hidden in plain sight, waiting to be uncovered. Sitting there, listening to him patronize me, listening to his lawyers explain why I deserved next to nothing, solidified my decision. There would be no settlement. No quiet resolution. I would not be cast aside, left to struggle while he enjoyed the fruits of his crimes. He had chosen this path of destruction, and I would meet him on it. I wouldn't just defend myself. I would expose him. My lawyer sensed the shift in me. On the way out of the failed mediation, she looked at me, her expression unreadable. "So," she said. "Court, then?" "Court." I confirmed, the word feeling solid, right? "And we use everything." She nodded, a flicker of grim satisfaction in her eyes. She understood. This wasn't just a legal strategy anymore. It was a fight for justice. The days leading up to the court date were agonizing. The final preparations with my lawyer, going over the evidence one last time, rehearsing questions, anticipating his legal team's arguments. The scale of what I was about to do weighed heavily on me. I wasn't just getting a divorce. I was potentially sending my husband to prison. It was a somber realization, devoid of any triumph. This wasn't a victory lap. It was a necessary act of self-preservation and exposure. My lawyer explained the strategy. We wouldn't lead with the fraud. We would build the case for my involvement in the business first, establishing my contributions, my role, undermining his narrative that I was irrelevant. Then, during his testimony, when he was under oath and cornered, we would introduce the evidence of his fraud. It had to be timed perfectly, delivered with maximum impact, leaving him no room to maneuver or lie his way out of it. The morning of the hearing arrived with a gray, overcast sky that mirrored my mood. I dressed carefully, choosing an outfit that felt professional, strong, not overtly emotional. I wanted to project calm confidence, a stark contrast to the turmoil churning inside me. My lawyer met me at the courthouse steps, her presence a steady anchor in the swirling anxiety. Entering the courtroom felt like stepping onto a stage. The judge sat elevated, a figure of impartial authority. The court reporter was ready, fingers poised over the stenotype machine. The rows of benches were sparsely filled, mostly legal staff, maybe a few curious onlookers. And then there was him, sitting with his lawyers, looking confident, even a little bored, scrolling on his phone before proceedings began. He still didn't know what was coming. That knowledge was a strange mix of power and dread. The early hours were a blur of legal formalities, opening statements, setting the scene. My lawyer presented our case, laying out the history of the business, my integral role, supported by documents I had carefully preserved, old emails, meeting minutes, financial reports I had prepared, all refuting his claim that I was uninvolved. His lawyers countered, painting me as someone who had merely done secretarial work, not contributing to the strategic or financial growth of the company. It was a deliberate distortion of reality, but it was their strategy. Then, it was his turn to testify. He took the stand, swore to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. The irony was not lost on me. He looked composed, answering his lawyer's questions with practiced ease, reinforcing his narrative of being the sole architect of the business, the one who had taken all the risks, made all the sacrifices. He described my role dismissively, as peripheral, administrative. Every word felt like a punch to the gut, a public erasure of my existence within the framework of our shared history. My lawyer began her cross-examination. She started slowly, asking about the business's founding, its structure, its profitability. His answers remained smooth, confident. He deflected questions about specific financial periods, citing complexity or memory lapse. He was good. He was used to this, to controlling the narrative, to lying with a straight face. The temperature in the room seemed to drop as my lawyer's questions became more pointed, more specific. She started asking about certain transactions, larger payments made to obscure entities. He hesitated, stumbling slightly over his answers, offering vague explanations about consulting fees or strategic investments. He was getting uncomfortable, but he still didn't suspect the trap closing around him. Then, she changed tack. She asked him directly about the shell corporations, naming them one by one. His eyes flickered. He denied knowing anything about them, or claimed they were legitimate business entities for tax optimization, nothing untoward. His voice was steady, but I could see a fine sheen of sweat on his forehead. He was starting to feel the heat. My lawyer walked back to our table. My heart was hammering, a frantic rhythm against my ribs. This was it. The moment. I picked up the file, the one containing the photographic copies of the documents from the hidden box. It felt heavier now, charged with the weight of everything that was about to happen. I handed it to her. She walked back to the witness stand, her movements deliberate. She placed the file in front of him. This wasn't just a few pages. It was a thick collection of irrefutable evidence. Bank statements, wire transfer confirmations, incorporation papers for offshore entities, ledgers detailing millions of dollars flowing into accounts he controlled, accounts hidden from the company's official books, hidden from me, hidden from the tax authorities. He looked down at the file. His eyes scanned the first few pages. The color drained from his face instantly. It wasn't a gradual paling. It was as if someone had flipped a switch, turning off the light beneath his skin. The smug confidence vanished, replaced by raw, unadulterated panic. His eyes widened, darting from the documents to his lawyers, then back to the documents. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. Just a choked sound, a gasp for air that seemed trapped in his throat. He started trembling, violently this time, the witness stand rattling slightly. His hands clawed at the edges of the file, not opening it further, but gripping it as if trying to make it disappear. His lawyer was on her feet, shouting an objection, something about relevance, about improper evidence. But her voice was lost in the sudden, profound silence that had fallen over the courtroom. Everyone was watching him. The judge, the court reporter, the few people in the gallery. All eyes were on the man collapsing on the witness stand. He tried to push the file away, his hand shaking so hard he knocked over the water pitcher on the stand. Water spilled across the documents, a symbolic washing away of his carefully constructed lies. He looked up, his eyes meeting mine across the room. There was no anger, no contempt, only pure, gut-wrenching fear and disbelief. He saw me, not just as the woman he had tried to discard, but as the architect of his undoing, the one who held the keys to his carefully guarded secrets. He made another sound, a guttural moan, and then his eyes rolled back into his head. His body went rigid for a second, then slumped forward onto the witness stand. He collapsed. Chaos erupted. His lawyers rushed forward, calling his name. The judge was banging his gavel, trying to restore order. Court officers moved in. It was a scene of frantic activity surrounding the still, prone figure on the stand. I sat there, frozen, watching it all unfold. There was no feeling of triumph, no surge of victory, just a hollow ache in my chest, a profound sadness for the destruction. Not just his destruction, but the destruction of everything we had built, everything I had believed in. The man who collapsed on the stand wasn't the man I had married, not the man I had loved and trusted. He was a stranger, revealed in his true form by the weight of his own lies. The immediate aftermath in the courtroom was a blur of activity. Paramedics were called. He was attended to, eventually carried out on a stretcher. The judge recessed the hearing. My lawyer stayed by my side, quiet, letting me process. The silence returned, but it was different now. It was the silence that follows an explosion, the ringing in your ears, the dust settling on the ruins. The legal proceedings were effectively paused. His collapse, medically documented, necessitated a delay. But the damage was done. The evidence was on the record, entered into the court. The sheer volume and nature of the documents spoke volumes. It wasn't just a divorce case anymore. It was now inextricably linked to a potential criminal investigation. News travels fast, especially in legal and business circles. The rumors started immediately. Whispers about the dramatic scene in court, about the evidence presented. The walls he had built around his secrets crumbled rapidly. Once the financial fraud was exposed in court, it triggered a cascade of inquiries. Tax authorities, potentially the SEC depending on the nature of his business and fraud, began looking into his affairs. The company he had claimed was solely his was now under intense scrutiny, its assets potentially frozen or seized. His legal team became far less aggressive. Their focus shifted from fighting my divorce claim to damage control regarding the fraud allegations. The narrative he had carefully constructed about my irrelevance in the business was completely undermined by the scale of the financial manipulation that had been happening under his watch, manipulation I had unwittingly helped manage the legitimate side of for years. It became clear that my detailed knowledge of the company's legitimate finances was crucial, both to understand the fraud and to help unravel it. The divorce settlement negotiations, when they eventually resumed, were vastly different. His position of power had evaporated. He was no longer dictating terms. He was facing potential criminal charges and the complete loss of his business and wealth. My lawyer was firm. Given the extent of the fraud and the legal exposure he faced, he had very little leverage. The settlement reflected not just my rightful claim to half of the marital assets, including the business built during the marriage, regardless of his attempts to frame it otherwise, but also took into account the years he had been siphoning off funds and the damage he had done. It wasn't about revenge. Not for me. It was about justice. About not being left penniless and violated while the man who did it walked away clean. The settlement was substantial, enough to secure my financial future, to rebuild. It included a significant portion of the remaining legitimate business assets, a share of the recovered hidden funds, a complex process that took time and legal battles, and ownership of assets like our home. He faced the consequences of his actions. The criminal investigations moved forward. I didn't follow the details closely. I heard snippets through legal channels, rumors that he was facing multiple charges, that the business was effectively defunct, its reputation destroyed. The man who had strutted into court, confident in his ability to discard me and his crimes, had seen his world collapse literally and figuratively. The aftermath of all this wasn't a feeling of triumphant victory. It was more like the quiet exhaustion after a long, brutal war. There was relief, certainly. The constant anxiety about survival was gone. The feeling of being hunted, of being erased, was gone. But there was also a deep sadness. Sadness for the marriage that had ended in such spectacular destruction, for the years that had been built on a foundation of lies I hadn't seen, for the person I thought I knew who turned out to be a stranger, a criminal. Rebuilding my life was a slow process. It wasn't just about the finances, though that was a crucial first step. It was about rebuilding trust in myself, in my judgment, in the world. I had to confront the fact that I had been so blind, so trusting, that I had poured my energy and loyalty into a partnership with someone who was fundamentally dishonest. That hurt, a deep, internal wound that took time to heal. I sold the house. It held too many ghosts, too many memories, both good and bad, now tainted by the knowledge of the deception that had taken place within its walls. I moved to a different city, a fresh start. I used some of the settlement money to invest, wisely this time, relying on my own financial acumen, not someone else's supposed expertise. I started a small consulting business, helping other small businesses with their financials. It felt right, using my skills not for someone else's hidden agenda, but for legitimate growth, for transparency. The fear that had been a constant companion for so long slowly faded, replaced by a quiet confidence. I had faced a betrayal so profound it could have destroyed me, and I had not only survived but emerged with my integrity intact and my future secured. I had been underestimated, dismissed, cast aside, but I had found my strength in the very tools he had tried to take away from me: my knowledge, my determination, my refusal to be a victim. Looking back now, from the vantage point of a few years removed from the storm, I can see the path I walked. It was a journey through darkness, through fear and doubt, but it led me to a place of unexpected resilience. The paper trail he thought he had buried became my lifeline, the evidence of his fraud, not just my salvation, but the instrument of his reckoning. He tried to poison the well of our shared life, to drain it dry and leave me parched, but in the process, he only revealed the toxic depths of his own character. And in that exposure, I found my freedom. If this story hit close to home, I'd love to hear your version. Drop a comment with where you're listening from and what time it is. Thanks for being here. Subscribing helps bring more of these to life.